right, hello to everybody who is joining us in our conversation.
Yeah.
Folks are streaming in.
Dan, could you make David Waxberg a co-host?
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Oops, not Dorothy Pompo. Okay. Sorry, let me change that. So we are all together here in real time, all of us around the country, around the world. And I was thinking of my aunt and I accidentally made her the co-host. Okay. Sorry, Dorothy. Okay. All right, well, let's see. Let's move over to chat. I'm Dan Schifrin, your moderator. But before we moderate, we will be hosting, and our host is Howard Friedman.
Okay, so I will begin. So hi, everybody. I'm Howard Friedman. I'm the director of the Jewish Community Library, which is a program of Jewish Learning Works. I want to welcome all of you here to today's virtual program, Exile at Home, the Humor Issue, with Marika Brussel, Caroline Kessler, Dan Schifrin, and Sarah Stone in collaboration with Story Forward, the JCC of the East Bay, and jewishLIVE. First, some quick ground rules. Because we do have a large number of attendees, everybody is going to be muted during the program except for the presenters. However, we do invite you to use the chat function, which for most of you is at the bottom of the screen, to introduce yourselves, maybe say where you're from, make any comments over the course of the presentation, and offer any questions that you would like to ask of any of the presenters to answer at the end of the program. So I'll first introduce the moderator and organizer, Dan Schifrin, and then he'll introduce the others. Dan Schifrin has taught creative writing at UC Berkeley in San Francisco State and served as writer in residence at the Contemporary Jewish Museum. He's an author and playwright whose stories and essays have been published widely. And as part of a LABA fellowship at the JCC of the East Bay, he's writing a play about medieval Jewish Spain and its influence on 21st century America. And so I am now going to leave it to Dan to introduce the rest of you.
I sure will. We might have a small technical glitch as we start.
Sure.
I think that someone might be sharing a screen illegally.
Okay, let me just.
Maybe I can do that. Okay. Right. We are all still trying to figure out how all these things work in our exiles in our homes. So as we start, I'd be really interested to know, like, where's everybody coming from, or where's everybody from? What city are you in? What brings you to the conversation today? And if you have like a burning question or a special interest in humor, or creativity, or Jewishness, or the combination of those things, put it in the chat. And over the course of the conversation, we want to bring in some of those questions as organically as we can, even though the larger conversation will happen near the end. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for starting that process. Okay, I'm gonna jump right in. I'm gonna introduce our artists, and this is going to be in alphabetical order. So Marika Brussel is an award-winning choreographer working in the ballet genre. Informed by her background as a fiction writer, she tells contemporary stories through ballet, showing our interconnectedness and equity as humans from country to country, class to class, and generation to generation, bringing ballet into the 21st century. From Shadows, a ballet about homelessness, premiered in October 2017 to sold-out audiences in San Francisco. Her ballet, Still Time for Impossible, looked at climate crisis. Her ballets have been commissioned all over the country, including the Columbia Repertory Ballet, Bay Point Ballet, Berkeley Ballet Theater, and Ballet Theater of New Mexico. So welcome, Marika. We also have Caroline Kessler, who is a poet, editor, and facilitator currently based in Oakland on Chochenyo Ohlone land. She is co-creator of the 18 Somethings Project, a virtual writing adventure, and the author of Ritual in Blue, published by Sutra Press. Her work has been published in the McNeese Review, Superstition Review, Letters, Rivet, and elsewhere. Welcome, Caroline. And Sarah Stone is the author of the novels The True Sources of the Nile and Hungry Ghost Theater, a finalist for the annual Northern California Book Award. She's also the co-author with Ron Nyren of Deepening Fiction, a practical guide for intermediate and advanced writers. Her work has appeared in Plowshares, Story Quarterly, The Million, Scoundrel Time, The Believer, and other publications. She has written for and taught on Korean television, reported on human rights in Burundi, created writing both privately and online for Stanford Continuing Studies. Sarah and everybody. This larger series is called Exile at Home, and I think the reasons for it are probably obvious, that we are all exiled from our lives mostly and living in our home. Exile is a particularly Jewish idea, and Jewish creatives have always tried to figure out what to do with exile and what exile means. Humor has been an important part of the artistic temperament, Jewish life, and human life more broadly. And there's something about the work that we all do together as LABA fellows. Maybe I'll say another word about that. So the LABA fellows are working on this idea of humor. We are studying Jewish texts together at the Berkeley JCC. And over the course of this year, we've been looking at what humor means within a Jewish and with a creative context. So putting all those things together, Exile at Home, humor, Jewishness, and creativity, we brought folks together today to talk about these concerns. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. Our three panelists are going to, and I guess myself at some point, are going to answer a basic question, which is that how do creativity and humor function together? How do they work in your work? And what have you learned maybe about the intersection of those things in the last several weeks when we've added exile to the mix? So Marika, you are up first. What is on your mind about those topics today?
Well, I think creativity and humor for me are somewhat separate. The only humorous thing that I've been able to do in my creative work so far is laugh at myself and what I'm trying to do, which I think has been pretty important. Otherwise, I couldn't go on with the work if I didn't, find it funny. But part of the reason I joined the LABA group, why I wanted to be part of it, was because I haven't been able to find levity in my work. Like everything I do is so serious, and it's just all too much. So I've been hoping to learn from everybody around me, and I already have from you guys a lot, how to bring the humor that I have deep down, because of course, I'm hilarious, right? How to put that into my work. And what I found being at home so far is that the dark humor is getting darker, and the sort of physical humor is getting a little bit more funny to me, which it hadn't ever been before. So maybe we could talk about that again later, if that makes sense to people.
Well, you come out of a ballet tradition, which I don't think of as being humorous exactly, although certainly other kinds of movement and dance have more of a humorous component.
Well, it's not slapstick funny,
right?
But there are ballets that are funny. I don't like those ballets, but it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hold that thought. We will continue our first round of questions, and then we will dig deeper into our work. Okay, Caroline, you are next up. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I feel similar to Marika in some ways. I'm a poet, and my poetry is just not often sort of laugh out loud funny, but I think there is some observational humor. You could think of like the Seinfeld commentary on just what is happening, and that's a sort of exciting humor to me, and it feels really possible in poetry. And then there's also this element that I'm working on, which is juxtaposing different kinds of images, and that on their own, those images or that dialogue or some sort of idea wouldn't be very funny in and of itself, but next to something else that sort of turns the image on its head, and then it might become funny or just more interesting. And I think this question of creativity and humor is also really interesting, because if we just think about creativity as the process, not necessarily what are we making, but how is it to be in the process of creating whatever, whether you're making dance or music or art, visual art or poems. But maybe there's something funny for you in your own process that never makes it onto the page, but that is sort of amusing or lets you release something in your process. So yeah, and then maybe we can talk later about this idea of exile. I was just thinking about how I think many people feel exiled, not just Jews, although we might have a special claim on exile, but you know, from a particular culture or place we're born into, or you know, even feeling exiled from our own family, and that can you know, we can access that sense of exile through the creativity. Some people make that kind of exile into something funny, and that might help us cope and process with something really difficult. So yeah, I'll pause there and say to hear what other folks have to say.
Great, and maybe just a super quick follow-up to that. It's interesting to think about poetry and humor in connection, because poetry seems to work brilliantly when unexpected images or moments or feeling come together. And the point of poetry often isn't humor per se, but that sense of like explosive possibilities that happens when poetic elements come together unexpectedly is also kind of what happens in humor. There's something about the compression of poetic imagery and the compression of humor that makes both those art forms really rich.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's so true.
Yeah, great. Okay, more on that soon. Sarah Stone.
So I'm thinking about what you're all saying and building on that a little, and how much humor is in some way about the unexpected. We laugh when we're startled, we laugh. We've been talking a little bit in Laba about incongruity and looking at juxtaposition and one thing against another. I think there's also scale. There's this quality of what's going on around us is so not funny that our minds keep trying to process it. I don't know how many people here on the call today have some kind of creative practice, but a lot of the artists I know have been struggling a little because the usual ways of producing or disappearing into the imagination, it's not as readily flowing, because so much of our brain is used just trying to understand reality. And in the middle of the hardness of it, there's also a kind of little opening in that sense of being exiled at home gives us a chance to think about what is home to us. To what extent is home not just our place that we live, but the bookstore down the block and the friends who we go out with every Thursday night. And we start to figure out this part is precious and this part can fall away. And something that's sort of beautiful, not in a ha-ha, laugh out loud way, is everybody looking at the details of their lives. Like my social media feeds are full of amazing photographs of a thing in someone's garden and their cat, and that sense of the preciousness of it. So while you're exiled, you're also in some way more deeply at home. So I think that's really beautiful. And then there's these startling moments where you're trying to figure out how to do something new and something really doesn't work. And you just start laughing, and it doesn't take away from the big situation, but it's often in the minute details that the humor shows up when things are really hard.
And I sometimes feel guilty when something strikes me as funny at a moment when, you know, all the pandemic is happening. And I feel guilty for a moment. And then I realize that humor is such a coping strategy, and kind of the darker things are, in a way, the more important it becomes, right? In some way. And humor isn't always laugh out loud funny. It's not always, it's not always just about the yucks. It's about, finding that space to have a little more perspective on things. That is just a little bit fun. Hear me okay? All right. Howard, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? I'm sure I'll be back online very soon.
While we're waiting, it's just so funny because we're all listening to see if, this is Marika talking, to see when Dan's going to come back. And I thought, oh, maybe we're all frozen. Is it just him? So I'm relieved to see Sarasone moving a little bit.
I'm back. I'm back online. If anyone missed me, see, that was hilarious. Couldn't be funnier. All right. Did I miss anything important, Marika?
Yes,
Okay.
you did.
Great. All right. My chat is wiped clean. Does everyone else have chat going strong?
It's wiped. Mine is,
Okay.
but I also froze before, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is just how we go through the world, with obstacles and make the best of it. Okay. So let's see who, I want to make sure that folks are still on the call. Okay, fantastic. So I was going to, for my brief share out, I wanted to share a couple quick things, some of the gleanings from our conversations in LABA. Rabbi Josh Layden has been our teacher. It's been really interesting to go deeper into the tradition and to look at some biblical and Talmudic stories and try to understand a little more, from a Jewish perspective, where does some of this humor come from? And one of the things that we had talked about was that it seems like the first humorist in the Bible is actually Sarah, right? Our matriarch Sarah, who, when the angels or the messengers came to their tent and said she was going to have a baby at however old she was, she laughed out loud, which was maybe a little bit rude in front of God. But there was something about the absurdity of her situation where she had to burst out laughing. And so, I don't know, I think of her as being the world's first comedian. Maybe there were some before that. I don't know if Eve was funny or Adam. I don't have the feeling they were. But I think that's really in kind of the time of exile, after, being exiled from the two temples and out, in the diaspora, where there was a sense that, what does it mean to be chosen when you're chosen to be in exile? And I think that, for me, that's, I think, where a lot of the Jewish bias toward or reliance on humor came from, trying to make sense of that, trying to square that circle. And just one of the things that became clear to me in looking at some of these Talmudic stories was that humor was a kind of an act of defiance. For instance, there's a famous story about Rabbi Meir, who goes to Rome to reclaim, I believe it's his sister-in-law, who has been captured, and she's in a harem. It's this crazy spy story. And it ends up being this kind of hilarious send-up of Roman culture. And the humor, I think, allowed the rabbis to make fun of their oppressors in a way that allowed them to succeed because of the subtlety of it, but also to have some sense of agency in the world. And I think the early rabbinic literature is full of those kinds of things. I also had the sense, and I think someone mentioned this also, about humor being something that makes life bearable for people and for all peoples, and especially for Jews. And I was thinking, I've actually stopped teaching Woody Allen recently, and we talked about this in our LABA conversation because of his egregious personal behavior. But because my son's about to graduate, I thought back to Woody Allen's speech to the graduates from like 40 years ago. And I'm just going to read the first 2 lines of it. And he says, "More than any other time in history, we face a crossroad. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray we have the wisdom to choose correctly." So, I think about this idea really going back to the Jewish exile into diaspora. Like, they have these choices, and both choices seem terrible, to die here or maybe to die out there. But there's something about the humor and the storytelling around humor that maybe allowed them to survive and thrive. So those are things that I have been thinking about recently in terms of the intersection of those things. Okay. Does anybody have a burning question among our panelists, or is there something on the chat side that we could bring into the conversation so far?
Well, I would just say a few folks have already dropped examples of humor and dance into the chat, and I'm curious if people want to keep doing that also for poetry, or Sarah writes a lot of fiction. It's just fun to start collecting these. I'm also curious about dance. I like to move as well, so that seems like a really rich place. And then I just was thinking of something which I wanted to say, which seems obvious but maybe is worth surfacing, which is that humor is really subjective and we all find very different things funny. And that's also part of, I think, what makes humor so weird. And then in this time in particular, right, where we're not in person laughing together or seeing some physical humor or slapstick, or even maybe it's harder to hear the intonation in someone's voice that would make something, clearly sarcastic or a different kind of tone. It's maybe changing what we find funny in a very surprising way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As you were talking, I was looking to see some of the suggestions that people have been making. Right. Belly dance version of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in Portland in 1999. Wouldn't have put all those things together, but sounds like that could be funny. And I encourage people to keep putting things down. We can all take a look and learn something. And then also, if the panelists, if you want to just put maybe your website in the chat, it's available from the library website, but also just put that in if people want to check things out as we're talking or after. I think that would be great. Okay, Marika.
I was just gonna say something about the suggestions about the ballets, the belly dance, Rite of Spring, and the Trocaderos. I wonder if people agree with this, that if you don't know the original, like if you don't know what they're making fun of, or if you don't know, if you don't know what they're making fun of, then is it funny, or is it just sort of silly, not funny? Does anybody have any feelings about that? Like for me, the Trocaderos, I don't know, just what they are is they are an all-male group of very, very highly skilled ballet dancers, and the men do all the parts. And they're very funny. It's supposed to be funny, but they're also really good. But if you didn't know, if you hadn't seen the original, then I don't know that it would be funny. It might just be weird.
Well, I think that maybe goes to Caroline's point about humor being subjective, right? That what's funny to someone may not be funny to someone else. And in fact, what you know about something will determine whether you get the joke or whether you think the joke is funny or, abrasive and harsh.
One of the things I'm thinking in listening to this is how our sense of humor changes in the middle of our current moment, day to day. There are people really close to me who have, or God knows, because we can't get tested, the virus. So at a moment when somebody's symptoms are up, I really don't find almost anything funny. And something that the day before, when we were telling some of the, in the chat, somebody was talking about the memes of the Corona jokes, and there's some that we were talking about them in LABA, and we were finding different things. Some of us were finding things hilarious, and other people were getting actually offended, even though we're here to discuss humor. And we were looking at the, depending on how you do it, there's one of, I'm going to say, and I apologize if it offends people, one of my favorite memes is early on when we were still just going, what is happening? There was the stock market had dived, and there was something with someone in his face plunged in his hands, and the tag was "Don't touch your face." And I saw that and I burst out laughing. But it's not funny. Actually, if I would go, I've cleverly been an artist, so I don't have lots of money to lose. But for somebody who's just afraid about their future, that's not a funny meme. So just thinking about like what's striking us as humorous and being a little careful with each other. I mean, I feel it even now that we're being a little bit careful because there's a lot of suffering out there. So being able to figure out what's that line between the humor that rescues us and the humor that's, not admitting how hard this is.
Yeah, I like that. I think about the banana peel, like the slipping on the banana peel, as something where you can slip on a banana peel and someone could get hurt, and you can laugh at it, and that is kind of a harming humor. There's a cruelty to that. But you can also slip on a banana peel, and you could come out of that into I don't have any gymnastics terms in my head right now. You can nail your landing or something. And that's funny for different reasons, right? And so, or you could fall and other things could happen and you don't laugh, but there are, humorous aspects that come out of that. And so maybe I'll just say something about humor that's so interesting is that humor, like great storytelling, I think hits us on an emotional level. And it's kind of like it's an accelerant. It gets to us before we even have a chance to stop ourselves. And so maybe, in a way like Sarah, you're noticing that meme of the stock market, like maybe you didn't even want to laugh at it, but you almost had no choice. There's some value in humor. And it's kind of a shortcut, I think. I'm talking in a creative sense, where if you can have a joke there, you're able to get to an audience member or reader really quickly. Sometimes it's completely joyful, and other times, we might want a reader or an audience member to feel uncomfortable. We might want them to laugh before they even realize that maybe they shouldn't laugh, or maybe they should question themselves. And so there's something about humor that does all kinds of interesting work. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife of craft.
When we want to upend reality, when we want to upend people's assumptions, that's one of our main assortments of tools.
Right. Great. Maybe we'll move to the kind of the second, or maybe it's the third part about, or in our conversation today, which is to share a little bit of work and to kind of like deepen our conversation. Marika, should we cycle back to B? And do you want to say what you were thinking of sharing, and we'll.
Sure. I'm going to share, so let's backtrack for a second. I had a show coming up, and it would have been this coming week. That would have been when my show was. So I postponed it, obviously. And we've been trying to rehearse through Zoom. And it's funny because it's absurd. It's ridiculous. But it's also not. It's also very poignant. So what I want to show you is first a clip from the first Zoom rehearsal of a pas de deux. So it's two people, and they would have been together, obviously. And I'm not gonna, okay, and I won't say that. And then I'm gonna show you the real rehearsal, the rehearsal in the studio that we did before this. And then we're gonna look at the other one again. And so you can see how it comes together. Like, it just, the context is so important. Like, if you just see it, and I'd be interested in hearing what people think. But just a really brief synopsis. This is the story of Lot's wife. Not a hilarious story. And this section is where he is telling her they have to go. So I'm gonna try. What might be funny is me trying to share my screen. So let's see how that goes. I am prepared, sort of. Oh, go away. Okay, there it is. So just take 1 sec, because I have a really old computer. Also, that's funny.
We can all just be looking at the chat for a moment.
Okay. Good time. I have to get back to Zoom. And
It's already hilarious, Marika.
I know, I'm very funny. There we are. Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
And you should be authorized to share.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can kind of, I mean, I'm funny too because I look so good. Anyway, I'll just show it. The music, just so you know, was made for this ballet, composed for this ballet by Carlo Lucero. Okay, here it is. Okay, so that's all I was going to show you of that one. It's actually much longer. Sorry. Okay, and now I'm going to show you just a little, very brief part of the fun part, the real show. Okay. 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 So that's what it really looks like. And if you are just watching the Zoom, like you would have no idea, right? And it just looks absurd. But now that you've seen that, I just want to show you the Zoom again, really briefly. Even if you don't have like a really good dance background, I feel like you can kind of see what they're trying to do. Of course, the other one is still playing somewhere in space. All right. Get rid of that. I think I have the oldest computer of anybody here. No.
Well, computers are also very funny.
Okay, this is opening. And I will share my screen. Okay. You can kind of see him turning her, like here he's turning her And now this part I think works pretty well with the stirring. Anyway, that just gives you a little bit of an idea of the hilarity that is Zoom rehearsing these days.
This is so, Marika, for me, this is one of an example of something that has all the humorous aspects of like absurdity and irony without necessarily having to be laugh out loud funny, right? I mean, it's that species of humor. But it's funny going back. I mean, I had seen this before, but watching him try to lift her while she's in another room, another city, that's kind of funny.
It's kind of funny. I think what's also funny is that they only had one rehearsal in real life together. So I feel like if they had been like really together, like if we had been rehearsing for that part for months, then maybe you would have really been able to see it. You know, it would have been a completely different experience too. Yeah, great. Maybe I'll just say before we maybe transition to Caroline, who will be next. I think part of this conversation also, it's just implicit, but I'll just say it out loud, is that at a time when, most of us as artists, especially as like performers, choreographers, our work is not available to be seen. I love having the opportunity to see everyone's work and, for the work to get a little bit of exposure. So that's just saying that out loud. Let's make sure to support all of our artists who we will continue to need in the times ahead. Okay, Caroline.
Great. Yeah, so I'm just going to read a few poems. So you'll just hear my voice and you could watch me, or you could kind of close your eyes and let yourself be a little bit transported. The first one is called An Archive of Lifetimes, and I actually wrote it several years ago, but based on how weird time is right now, like what is Thursday, what is 2 o'clock even, I thought this would be appropriate. So, and there's a bit of a Yom Kippur reference at the end, so I thought this audience would especially appreciate that. An archive of lifetimes. The days accumulate, unseen snow becoming heavy, relentless termination dust. The days of previously understanding the attraction of the tide have slipped away, catching stripes of navy, silver, turquoise, jade, churning beneath the train's window, moving towards any opportunity to dip myself in and out of hot springs, saunas, steam rooms, all to transform the body I have this one shot in. I reeked of sulfur more days than I knew. My throat hurts. Why was I shouting for cars to stop coming towards me? Every day they bear down. Out west, prayer flags flutter from every balcony, and I could spend days collecting mantras while receiving automated responses in my inbox. Everyone is off, and I wish to be too. Days worth of falling asleep, trying to remember the addresses of every place I've ever lived, even for only a few weeks at a time. I keep the names in an envelope, signature upon delivery, all the time, forgetting the I is a thief, stealing the partial, mistaking it for the whole. This one day each year, we have to become unstuck, to release the tingling, the counting, the regret, this chest beating, alphabetical sense making. Thank you, Dan. It's such a strange thing to not, see people's reaction. I don't have you in the Brady Bunch view right now, just so I can look at my, Word document here. But okay, this is called peripatetic meditation. It's a little bit in the same vein of, in terms of this like cadence that I was working on as the poem I just read. And peripatetic means like sort of a wandering, a walking. Peripatetic meditation. Having shed most people I dislike, I chant various syllables, some in familiar languages, some not. I like to be transported by soundings. It keeps me grounded, a friend says about her meditation practice. What keeps me grounded is being on the ground, spine touching earth or cement. I'm not choosy. Dirt is nice. Walking on feet all day. I feel so far from where the world transpires. Mantras are considered capable of creating transformation. What else is capable of moving a body forward from the narrow place to the expanse? I could spend ages on these wonderings. How much time do I have to see my gleefully pointless projects come to life? They are nothing if not patient, a glossy magazine says about two quite famous artists who appear happy and married, unlike most people I know. The blue of the horizon changes the closer I move to it. Maybe if I keep saying the word portal, I will eventually move through one. And I think I'll just read one more. So we have, yeah, it's a little bit, it's called A Practice of Divination. It's funny, as I'm reading all these to it, you know, I'm assuming mostly Jewish audience, I'm noticing the certain Jewish references, you know, the narrow place, the expansive place, you know, we're in Passover, coming out of Egypt. These sorts of references are, it's really fun for me to be able to read to this kind of audience and maybe trust that some of these are coming through with different meanings for you all. So this is called A Practice of Divination. She swallows a pill containing a camera that will photograph her insides and stays up all night, wild-eyed, itchy suspense of developing photos nags at her. Everything is happening exactly as it should. Heat rises in plumes from every corner, trees entwined with phone wires, snagging birds. The wilderness, as a way of being, gets farther and farther away. We speed up to slow down. Our self-driving cars navigate us towards consciousness. She takes pages of notes while the psychic tells her what she already knows. Later, there are blank spaces instead of names. Plumtree scrapes the side of the house as she wonders what to save in a fire, that post-crying hiccup laugh of recognition we can all manufacture. Go ahead and audit a class in uncertainty studies, or don't. What if where I am is what I need? The rainstorm will be the litmus test. She won't admit the question will never be resolved. More B12, please, more, intones from a throat. Boys on mountain bikes navigate her no-through street, then the town's grid. One shouts, "You can't," as she ties a blanket around the plum tree to catch its fruit, holding off the inevitable bruising. I want to rediscover magic, says a voice she doesn't recognize as her own. Everyone giddy from essential oils, doled out on palms, inhaled from cupped hands. She'll try anything twice, bereft of a new exhaustion. I'm busy is the fashionable response to everything. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, even peripatetic meditation, even as a title, is kind of hilarious, even though it means like a walking meditation. Just the word peripatetic is so like antsy and non-meditative. That I love that. Yeah, giddy from essential oils, and auditing a class in uncertainty studies. I feel like I've done that before. I don't think it turned out well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Caroline, any more thoughts? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just realizing, yeah, there was even a reference in this last poem to laughing. And I think I did pick these three in this context, not because I thought there was something like so hilarious about these, but in an attempt to illustrate some of what I was talking about in the beginning, which is like the juxtaposition of different images. These poems are a little more rhythmic than what I've been writing now, which is to say I've just been writing these sentences, which I'm arranging into paragraphs, and maybe they're prose poems and maybe they're short essays, and I'm not totally sure yet, but it's interesting also to go back to my own work and see how some of it is just still perhaps even more relevant in this pandemic time, because, you know, we've been in different apocalypse scenarios around climate change and other things that then some similar feelings resonate, I think, into this time. And yeah, And oh, this feeling of exile. Sorry, this was the last thing I was going to say. Just that was a little bit also why I chose these, because there's something about feeling exiled even from yourself or in your own body and from your environment that I think is relevant to our conversation.
Yeah, that's great. One of my favorite phrases, let's see if I can pull it whole out of my mind, is Kafka. He says, why should I have anything in common with the Jewish people? I hardly have anything in common with myself.
Totally.
It's this idea of kind of exile from oneself is also a kind of a standard feature of being human. And as I think it was Groucho Marx said, Jews are like everybody else, only more so. Love the Marx Brothers. Great. Okay. Sarah, what would you like to share with us today?
Okay. Thank you. It was beautiful to see those. I just feel it's great to be in such company. I'm going to read here's the backwards version of Hungry Ghost Theater, which is most recent novel. And I'm just going to read 2 pages. The book is about a family of half Jewish, in fact, artists and activists and idealists and people who would like to save the world, but keep getting in their own way. There's some addiction and mental illness. I come from a family which has a lot of mental illness, and sometimes we have more or less of a sense of humor about whatever's going on. And for a while I worked as a psychiatric aide. So though none of those, there's nobody explicitly referenced here who's an actual person, some of those stories have percolated through, and there's a lot of different voices in here. It happens in Zanzibar, and it happens in the Santa Cruz Mountains and South Korea, and 6 different hells. And this piece is in a locked psychiatric facility, and there's a teenager who's struggling with despair and has landed herself here. And Gina, who is an older, longtime patient, who's taken on herself that she's going to mentor Ariel in some way and really give her a sense of perspective. So there are little moments. I wouldn't say that this was like a rip-roaring laugh fest, but there are these little moments of altered perspective. And there is a way in which anytime we're locked up, it's a kind of exile. So I thought for today. They're not going to poison us. Gina breaks the top of her runny egg and examines it. They're more worried about keeping us quiet so we can't get underfoot in their wars. And when Ariel doesn't know what to say, she says, you have noticed there are 70 or so wars going on out there. You want the list? Gina seems like a member of Ariel's own family, losers and idealists. What is it Aunt Julie always says? We come from crazy. It's so awful that Ariel starts laughing. You think it's funny, do you? Ready to live yet? Gina eats 3 quick bites of her egg with an expression of determination. Ariel pokes at her cereal and eats a bite. Does she have to eat a slimy egg too? According to their lights, they may even be protecting us, Gina says, but they can't do anything about the dreams. Ariel can't put this remark together with whatever Gina was saying before, but she's willing to try. The dreams, I know about those. The Gina who is showing Ariel around seems to be replaced by someone unfocused who keeps looking off into space. If you listen, the dead will tell you what's really happening. But if they possess you, it's bad. If they start to get inside you, start singing right away. Ariel tears her toast into pieces. She could dip it into the egg, mess it up, and make it look like she's eaten a full breakfast. Especially musical numbers. It interrupts their frequency. The PA system announces last call for breakfast. Numbers 75 through 99 should already be in the dining room. Last call for breakfast. A woman appears next to them with her tray, smiling. 400 watts. The sight of her seems to bring Gina back to herself. Ariel, this is my best friend Marjorie, who is saner than you are. Marjorie, this is Ariel, our new little nutball, who's legitimately terrified of this place and everyone in it. Marjorie says, it's not so bad in here. You get used to it. Not like state. We don't want her to get used to it. But why can't I have my own clothes? Ariel shrugs in her too large flowered dress and old sweater, a snake imprisoned in dry skin, needing to scrape it against rock. Too hard for them to do laundry if they keep track. Marjorie's about 40 with shoulder-length black hair. When she smiles, she looks as if she's holding a secret under her tongue, waiting for it to melt. Wasn't there a song that the little badger Francis sang in Bread and Jam for Francis about the slipperiness of boiled eggs? A story Ariel's mother read her over and over. And then Katya memorized it, pretended to read it too. They will all be better off without Ariel around. But why couldn't she have done this cleanly so they could be sad for a while and then start getting over it? She begins to weep. I want to die. I deserve to die. The way I look at it is, you will, says Gina. She strokes the matted strands of Ariel's hair. Don't let them see you cry. I'll tell you the rules later. But it's important. Dry your eyes, eat your breakfast. Don't make any disturbance. Here come the aides. Ariel sits up straighter but can't stop crying. A white-haired guy stands and hurls his tray, just missing them. The dining room hoots in joy and alarm. Someone else throws a tray. An alarm sounds and aides come running. Breakfast is over and the aides take away the ringleaders, to give them more drugs, to put them in solitary confinement, to punish them in some unimaginable way. Ariel has no idea, but introduced to breakfast theater at Shoreside, she's stopped crying. She heads out with Gina and Marjorie waiting in line to show their trays at the door. Be here now, says a poster covered with 60s looking flowers, and it seems like a possibility.
Right, full of irony in these complicated moments. Like there are moments, listening to this where I'm not sure if I'm supposed to laugh or cry. Right, and so like the "Be Here Now" sign, famous from what's his name, Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, right? Is that right, Ram Dass? Right, that seems like such a beautiful moment, but it seems completely opposite to what actually is happening, even though it's aspirational. So I'm maybe, Sarah, I could ask you, like when you were writing something like this, something that's a difficult kind of scene with difficult issues, how do you think about deploying humor for yourself? Meaning, if there's a humorous element to it, does it make the writing easier? Does it make it easier for you if that piece of humor is kind of floating there, creating a little bit of oxygen for yourself or for the reader?
I think it's a great question. I think for a lot of us that we come from, when I'm in a space where we're with, even this is half Jewish families, so they would be only like half funny. There would be like half of the family. No, there's humor coming from outside the Jews. But I often notice, that when you come from a pretty dark history, like if you haven't learned how to laugh at small things or how to figure out how to have a moment of perspective, and then suddenly you have another moment of perspective. I think the thing that you said about guilt is true. You like make a joke, and if it's not only your personal trouble, you think, how can I be, you're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I mean, I think that's some of our humor comes from, this kind of often exaggerated, but real. So it's not a question of inserting it. It's more like, it's like lava. Okay, that's not funny today either. It's all about timing.
Right.
Comes up from the ground.
Right. It's all in the timing. Right. That is so true. Maybe I'll broaden that question just for a moment to Caroline and Marika about humor. And I guess I asked that because I just when I think about work that I do that is difficult, either memoiristic or fictional, where there are difficult themes, the humor, it just gives me a little bit of space. I don't know if I think about it consciously in that way, but I feel like when it's present, I feel like somehow the work just kind of doesn't fall too flat. It doesn't become too self-important in some way where I'm like making a fetish of tragedy or something. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking this through in real time, but I'm wondering if Caroline and Marika, whether you think about any of those things or.
I think about humor as saving me from being too earnest about the subject.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to come off as taking myself too seriously, and I in real life don't want to take myself too seriously, and humor does that. And I was thinking too, when Sarah was speaking, about how for me humor has really helped me be resilient in my life, and I think that's true for many of us, and maybe for the Jews, or for any like group of people who have been through as a group a lot. Your resilience really can be buoyed by humor.
Agreed. Caroline, anything in your brain
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of a comment someone wrote earlier on the chat. I'm sorry, it's so far back I can't remember who said it, but about the personal being making fun of yourself
Hmm.
and creating like a self-deprecating sense of humor. I think can feel when we were speaking about being gentle with each other and perhaps worried about offending also in this particular time. And I think there's when I think about writing poetry or nonfiction, even about my own experience, like I mean, there's an attempt, I think, to maybe poke fun of myself a little bit or see myself as another character, like a different kind of person that I can say, oh, she's over there. I do write a lot of poems in third person with a she, which is not always me. It could just be the feminine or another character. But sometimes it's helpful to use that she and say, oh, she's being so silly over there doing that ridiculous thing. And again, I don't really think it's like laugh out loud funny, but it does create a kind of distancing that I think can be helpful and help you maybe see something true about yourself that was a little bit harder to see while being serious about it. And I think, Marika, you said this in the beginning about bringing levity to your work, and I think that's a great word that maybe we should be using alongside humor, because humor so often is like, oh, is it funny? Are we laughing aloud? And as we've shown in this conversation, like there are many other kinds of humor, and some humor may be very dark or morbid or sort of on the non-levity side, but then some of it I think is about bringing lightness and yeah, I'm not sure how to say it other than levity, but to bring that lightness and to say where can we find pockets of lightness even in the midst of things being really, really challenging. Yeah.
There's a whole like subfield of Holocaust humor. I have a friend in New York, Steve Lippman, who wrote a book about humor in the Holocaust maybe 25 years ago. And it was kind of controversial to come out with this anthology of not just, I mean, it was analytical, but it was basically, at a series of jokes or humorous dimensions of the Holocaust. But it turns out that people who lived through the Holocaust, people who were in the camps, they loved the book because it reflected something about their experience with how humor kind of helped them survive. And that I didn't do a lot of laughing in this book, but I felt buoyed by it. I felt something about like the human spirit that continued, and humor was a tool to make that possible. So I'm a fan.
Can I share something on that front?
Oh, please do.
So exactly that topic. I'm going to quote my 12-year-old daughter, who started a Facebook group once school. I live in Jerusalem. I'm Chai. I live in Jerusalem, and school was closed, almost a month ago. And when that started happening, she started a WhatsApp group to receive memes about jokes for Corona. And she started it, and they just poured in. And she said, she had learned that there were jokes told during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, and she could never understand how they could be laughing at such a horrible time. She couldn't understand it. But once she saw, obviously we're in a much better time frame now, but she saw these jokes just pour in immediately. She understood it. She's like, we're locked down, life is boring, life is, tough. And so she could understand it on a smaller scale, and it made sense to her.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us, Chaya, from Jerusalem. And also, I want to have a shout out to my friend Mirta Kupfermink, who is joining us from Buenos Aires. She is the director of the LABA Fellowship in Argentina, which is great. Thank you for joining us. Howard, I was going to lean on you for a minute to see if, especially earlier in the chat where when my internet bounced me off, I've lost those comments. Is there something there that you have discovered that would allow us to move forward with another couple questions?
No, I don't think there really have been questions, but I think it would be great if people do have them for any specific folks or for the entire group. Just share them in the chat, and then I'll share them with you.
Great, that'd be great. Yeah. Well, just come back here. Oh, I was going to, should I share something real quick?
May I?
Oh, hi, Mirta.
Yes. Just I was thinking, sorry for my English. I was thinking that it depends a lot who is making the humor, because if you are inside the same group, you admit certain kind of jokes, but you would never admit those jokes from this home, let's say. So it's also very peculiar where and when and what kind of humor or joke we are doing. Thank you.
Right. Right. You say things in group that you wouldn't say out group.
Exactly.
Right. And if they said it to you, you would be horrified, even though it might literally be exactly the same words.
And you might have something that you will say in group just to each other. You could still make a joke, but you might make a joke to the out group, but it's not the same joke that you would make to the in group, because there's a way in which we're protecting each other. And when we're being humorous, we're being vulnerable.
Yeah, interesting. Right. Humor might allow something within an in-group to bring it to the surface and acknowledge it, even acknowledge something possibly unpleasant about a group characteristics that you just need to say to yourself and acknowledge, but you don't want to broadcast to the world. But it manifests it in a way that you can look at it. It's like bringing something up from the subconscious to work with it.
Yeah, well, I think this is so interesting for people in this panel, but also the whole call, who are performance artists, who are in front of an audience creating work that then the audience can respond to. And that's like a group that, an out group that obviously you can't control. Whereas, and I read poems in front of groups, but more often my work is on the page and someone is reading it and I have no idea what is their reaction. And there's something kind of freeing about that. Like, I don't have to feel offended if people don't laugh at that moment in the play that I was like, I'm sure that will be funny. And Dan, I don't know if you've had specific experience about this, or Marika, even though I know you said your dance is not so funny, but just and there's several other Labo fellows that work in this performance way, which is has been really interesting for me. It's just very different from my own practice.
Well, for me, I'll just jump in if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, usually as a performer, there's no response because of the kind of theater it is. You know, in that the theater setting, everyone's quiet. But as a teacher, and I think many people here probably have this experience, like if I make a joke and I don't get a response, then I feel bad. I feel like I failed. So I think as a teacher, as an instructor, many of us have this experience of, you know, creatively trying to engage our you know, audience, our students, and we need that like feedback. And it's weird to not get it.
There was something, it's funny, humor can be very vulnerable, right? I mean, there's nothing worse than being in front of a group and saying something that you think is funny and not getting a response. Much worse than saying something serious and not getting that much of a response. But no response to humor is, even a passive, just nobody saying anything, is almost feels like an act of violence, right? I mean, it's terrible.
The possibilities for humiliation with humor are almost endless, and it's sort of a disconnection. We have suddenly established, you know, there may be shame because you're afraid that you have somehow committed an act which is offensive, but then there's also that sense of complete disconnection. People are always like, I want someone with a sense of humor when they're looking for love, and we don't mean the same things by sense of humor. And if you were looking for somebody dryly witty and you get the person who adores the banana peel, you didn't get what you were looking for.
Right, no. That is true. Yeah, okay. Well, we may be getting near the end of our conversation today. I was gonna maybe just a quick note that in 2 weeks, we Story Forward, Dan, and the library and the JCC are going to be presenting some more folks from our LABA collective. So 2 Sundays from now, not next Sunday, And then the Sunday after that, we will also be doing it. And so if you have signed up through the library, we will make sure, or I don't know, I shouldn't speak for Howard, but hope to get you that information. It's also on all the social media. And I think, Howard, you have something next Sunday at 2.
Correct. Next Sunday at 2 o'clock, we will have Professor Rachel Gross from San Francisco State University talking about Crisco and schmaltz and who gets to control the rules of the Jewish kitchen, or something different. It'll be great. So you can go to jewishcommunitylibrary.org to find out details or contact me.
Great, fantastic. All right. Does anybody have any super final thoughts on humor, creativity, Judaism? Happy Easter, everyone, as well, for those of us who celebrated in part.
Thank you all for being here, and Dan and the library and everyone for coordinating this conversation, and Sarah and Marika. It's just been really fun for me. So
Yeah, for me as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your great and gorgeous and interesting comments. I feel a larger sense of, I don't know, what's lightness. Yeah, the kind of humor that's a little, things are feel a little lighter than they did. So thank you, everyone.
Me too. All right. Well, hope to see everyone next week and the weeks after, Sunday at 2. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.